Hello, wonderful people. Welcome once again to your most educative midweek Bible teaching program. This program is supposed to be one that will keep the believer on his toes because Bible says that we should work out our salvation with fear and trembling. This is the narrow path. My name is Theophilus Lamptey. Last week, we started off by discussing what I call God permits oppression or God permits persecution as the theme for the month of November. And I realized that people were kind of fascinated about the fact that God actually permits oppression and persecution. Yes, but that is the truth of the matter. God uses this route to be able to bring back believers that are falling into a state of apostasy. This was the situation for the Israelites back in the days. Most often than not, God will rescue them from the enemy, and then they would go and form alliances with the enemy and backslide. So whenever God wanted the believer to come back to serving him and acknowledging him as his Lord and his personal Savior, God will allow the enemy to oppress, frustrate, and persecute the believer. And we saw it countless times in the Bible that whenever God allowed the believer to be oppressed and frustrated by the enemy, they would begin to call the name of the Lord again. Today, we are supposed to look at why God has to allow the enemy to oppress the believer. And I identified it last week that there is something we call disobedience. Whenever the believer disobeys God, that means he has moved away from the instructions or the rules that God has set in place, and they've decided to take their faith into their own hands. And whenever disobedience comes into the scene, God must bring in this technology called persecution or oppression by allowing the very enemies that he's delivering us from to overpower us. So you see that time and time again, you see the Bible talking about the fact that, and God allowed the enemy to besiege the believer, and God gave strength to the enemy to overtake the believer. It is not because the enemy was too strong, but because God had an agenda. God wanted that thing to happen. So God permitted that the believer will be besieged so that they will be able to go through that learning curve that God is trying to teach them. Today, we are going to look at some of the reasons why the believer plunges into what I call disobedience. That will cause God then to resort to allowing the enemy to begin to persecute or oppress the believer. First of all, let's look at what the dictionary is saying. Disobedience. Disobedience is basically failure or refusal to obey rules or someone in authority. So whenever we go contrary to the rules that God has set in place, we've entered into disobedience. And when you enter into disobedience, because of the love God has for his people, he will do whatever it takes to win the people back to himself. And unfortunately, one of the ways God will use, I'm saying unfortunately because nobody wants to go through oppression, nobody wants to go through persecution. That's why I use the word unfortunately. That is what God will do. He will allow the enemy to persecute us. He will allow the enemy to oppress us. Most of the time, believers, if you agree with me, the time that you started to pray very fervently was when God allowed the enemy to bring you a very scary dream. When you had some nightmare, you jumped out of bed sweating and panting, and that was the time you decided to embark on a 21 days fast. Had that thing not happened to you, we would have been living a very careless life. So yes, persecution and oppression is not necessarily evil in that sense, because God uses anything and everyone available for his glory, because he created everything and everyone, including the devil. Last week, I made a very profound statement. I said that the devil and all the demons are available for God to use. And in fact, God uses them. They are full-time employees of God, just that they are working without salary and they are not even aware. So when they come and attack you, they feel they are coming to do evil to you. But Bible said that the enemy meant it for evil, but God will turn it around for his good. So whenever God permits the enemy to come at you, it means that God is trying to teach you a lesson. God is trying to let you pick some notes out of whatever the situation is, and then he begins to bless and then elevate you once again. So quickly, we are going to outline a few reasons why the believer will, in any case at all, disobey God. And then we realize that one of the things that is very predominant among the reasons is what I call indiscipline to carry on. The believer is supposed to be a very disciplined person. Christianity actually is a very disciplined lifestyle. That means you cannot live anyhow. You cannot do things just the way you want it. So whenever you get into a life of indiscipline, you are not able to carry on the assignment or the instructions God has given you. Most often than not, indiscipline also brings about carelessness, because we choose the careless and easy go life. Because to live a very regimented, disciplined life, it is not easy. So most of the time, believers will just want to go for the easy life. I can't keep praying all the time. I can't keep fasting. In fact, sin looks and is more appealing to me. So why do I have to live a sin-free life? And then we go for the easy life the world is affording. So first point is what I call indiscipline to carry on, or choosing the careless, easy go life. The second thing we are talking about is what I call being pressured into disobedience, or other people will say that we are lured into compromising. Most of the time, we have external pressure from people to disobey God, or we are lured into compromising what is not supposed to be the case. And the third point is our desire to be accepted by onlookers or neighbors. This also can lead us into doing so many things which are ungodly. So when your desire is to please the people around you, most definitely you are going to end up disobeying God, because you have to do things that will make you feel accepted. You know, we are in a situation where social media is the craze of the day, is the order of the day. Everybody wants to get likes and comments and feel that people appreciate them. If you are not careful as a believer, you can begin to walk the path of the sinner or the scornful, because the world will begin to tell you what you are supposed to do so that you begin to get acceptance. So if the acceptance of men is your desire, I can guarantee you that sooner than later you are going to fall into a realm of disobedience, and God will definitely allow the enemy to persecute and oppress you so that he can win you back unto himself. Another point that we need to also look at critically is what I call the fear factor, the physical impediments. All the devil can do is to bring us physical impediments. So when we see the physical impediments in the life that we are trying to live, it gives us a reason to not follow the original instructions of God. So whatever God has told you, you see physical impediments, and then you begin to reconsider. You begin to decide against what God told you to do originally. And that is one of the very, very critical things that can cause a believer to also disobey God. The fear factor or the physical impediment. So we have situations like when Goliath appeared, it made the Israelites began to disobey God, because that was not the way they used to fight battles back in the days. It was army against army. But the enemy came, and the enemy brought a physical impediment in the form of Goliath and said, "Choose for me a man." The final point we want to look at today is what I call lack of trust or faith in God. Because we don't trust God absolutely, because we don't have absolute faith in God, we end up disobeying him. In fact, the first 4 points can be summed up together in what I call lack of trust or faith in God. Because God has said something to us, if we trust him absolutely, if we have faith in him absolutely, we will not then begin to think otherwise. We will not begin to back out, no matter what happens to us. So if we are going to run away because of the physical impediment, if we are going to desire to please the people around us, the neighbors, into compromising, if we are going to allow the pressures of the onlookers to hit us, is because we don't trust in God absolutely. It's because we don't have absolute faith in God. The moment the believer steps into disobedience, God must employ this technology of permitting oppression or permitting persecution. And like I said the other time, take note of this. The aim or the motive of an activity is more important than the activity in itself. The motive behind God allowing us to be oppressed or persecuted is that he will redirect us back onto his saving grace. We've lost our path. The enemy has caused us to falling off the radars of God. But God will use this method, and the enemy will, behind the scenes, feel like he's actually winning. But unknowing to him, God is using it to churn our hearts back onto him. And most often than not, that is what happened to the Israelites. And God willing, next week, we would look at all these things. Shalom, peace, and bye-bye to you. Stay blessed.